Boston's Beacon Hill stands the African Meeting House, a structure built in 1806 that remains a symbol of Black faith, education, and activism. As the oldest extant Black church building in the United States, it has witnessed over 2 centuries of struggle and triumph, from the fight against slavery to the ongoing pursuit of racial justice in the modern day. Join us as we explore the historical context in which the African Meeting House came to be. For free Black communities in the 19th century, churches were more than just places of worship. They were safe havens, schools, community centers, and organizing hubs. At a time when Black Americans faced legal discrimination, churches provided spiritual refuge while also serving as meeting spaces for political and social activism. In the early 19th century, churches were among the very few places where free Black communities could gather safely due to widespread racial discrimination and segregation. Several key factors contributed to this. Firstly, legal and social restrictions. Many cities and states imposed laws that restricted Black assembly, fearing that gatherings could lead to organized resistance or rebellion. Public meeting halls often barred Black people from using their spaces, making churches one of the few options for large gatherings. Second, religious autonomy. Black churches were owned and operated by Black communities, giving them control over their own spaces. Unlike other institutions that were controlled by white authorities, churches provided a safe haven for free Black people to worship, learn, and organize without interference. Thirdly, they served as centers of education. Since most public schools were either segregated or entirely closed to Black students, churches often doubled as schools where Black children could receive an education. Fourthly, abolitionists and political hubs. Many Black churches became centers for abolitionist activities, hosting meetings, lectures, and organizing efforts to fight against slavery and racial injustice. Figures like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth frequently spoke at Black churches, using them as platforms to inspire activism. And last but not least, they served as places of mutual aid and community support. Black churches provided financial and social support, offering resources like job assistance, food, and shelter for struggling community members. They also formed mutual aid societies, which helped support widows, orphans, and the elderly, which the state itself was not taking care of. Because of these factors, Black churches were more than just places of worship, they became the backbone of Black community life. The African Meeting House was no exception. Built entirely by Black artisans, it became a pillar of Boston's growing free Black population, offering a place to gather, learn, and fight for justice. The fact that the African Meeting House was built entirely by Black artisans in 1806 was highly unusual and significant for the time. During the early 19th century, Black Americans were often denied access to skilled trades and largely confined to low-wage menial labor. Skilled Black craftsmen existed, obviously, but white-controlled trade guilds and apprenticeships largely excluded them, making it difficult for Black artisans to find opportunities to practice and showcase their skills on a large scale in order to be able to build large edifices like the African Meeting House. Therefore, the construction of the African Meeting House in Boston by Black artisans was a statement of the self-sufficiency and community pride that the Black community in Boston held. It demonstrated that free Black communities could build and sustain their own institutions without relying on white labor or funding. Additionally, while Black artisans did exist in trades like carpentry, masonry, and blacksmithing, it was rare for them to be given the opportunity to construct an entire building, especially one as prominent as a meeting house. The African Meeting House remains one of the oldest surviving Black church buildings in the whole United States, and its construction represents the skills of the Black artisans. Boston was a central hub for the abolitionist movement throughout the 19th century, serving as a meeting place for activism, publishing, and general resistance against slavery. By the early 1800s, Boston had become a center for Black and white abolitionists who were determined to end slavery in the United States. One of the most influential figures in Boston's abolitionist movement was William Lloyd Garrison, who founded The Liberator in 1831, a newspaper that became one of the most radical and widely circulated anti-slavery publications in the country. Garrison and the New England Anti-Slavery Society, established in Boston in 1832, played a major role in spreading abolitionist ideas. Boston was also home to Frederick Douglass, who delivered some of his most famous speeches in the African Meeting House and found strong support for his activism. Boston's abolitionists were also involved in direct resistance against slavery, such as the famous 1854 rescue of Anthony Burns, an escaped enslaved man who was captured under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The city erupted in protest, and despite efforts to free Burns, he was returned to slavery, further fueling anti-slavery sentiment in the city. The city's Black American community was particularly active in the abolitionist movement. The African Meeting House, which was built in 1806, became a gathering place for Black abolitionists, including David Walker, who wrote his radical Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World in Boston in 1829. The city was also a key stop on the Underground Railroad, offering refuge to escaped enslaved people. Boston was a stronghold of abolitionists, and the African Meeting House stood at the center of this movement. In 1832, it became the birthplace of the New England Anti-Slavery Society, founded by William Lloyd Garrison, one of America's most radical abolitionists. This organization was dedicated to the immediate emancipation, an idea that was controversial even among white anti-slavery activists at the time. Frederick Douglass, the formerly enslaved man who became one of the most influential voices for abolition, gave various fiery speeches at the African Meeting House, inspiring Black and white Bostonians alike to fight against slavery. Other leading figures like Maria Stuart, one of the first Black women to lecture publicly on race and gender equality, also spoke at the Meeting House, using it as a platform to speak about the needed change. In addition to being a center for abolitionism, the African Meeting House also served as a schoolhouse for Black children, long before public education was available to them through the state. For much of the 19th century, Black students in Boston faced severe segregation and underfunding, but schools housed within churches like the African Meeting House provided a rare opportunity for literacy and learning. The African Meeting House's role as a center for education was particularly significant because formal educational opportunities for Black Americans were extremely limited in the early 19th century. Many states actively restricted or outright banned Black education, fearing that literacy would empower enslaved and free Black people to challenge the status quo. The fact that the African Meeting House provided a space for learning, offering literacy programs, religious instruction, and even serving as a schoolhouse, a space for students to learn, demonstrates the resilience and determination of their community to educate themselves despite systemic barriers imposed on by the law. This was a unique occurrence because few places existed where Black children and adults could safely receive this kind of education. Many Black American schools operated in secret or under constant threat of white mob violence. By contrast, the African Meeting House publicly stood as a beacon of knowledge and self-improvement, not hiding that it was also a school, and therefore reinforced the belief that education was essential for racial uplift, civic participation, and abolitionist activism. It was also the training ground for future leaders who would go on to play significant roles in the fight against slavery and then later during the Civil Rights era. Over the centuries, the African Meeting House continued to evolve. By the late 19th century, Boston's Black population had begun to move to other neighborhoods, and in 1898, the congregation sold the building to a Jewish congregation, shifting its role in the community. However, the significance of the African Meeting House was never forgotten. In 1972, the building was purchased by the Museum of African American History, which undertook extensive restoration efforts to preserve its legacy. Today, It stands as a museum and educational center, ensuring that its history and the history of Boston's Black community and its fight for freedom and the role of faith in activism is never lost and remembered by future generations. The African Meeting House is more than just a historic landmark. It's a reminder of the power of faith in conjunction with community. And it asks us to remember the role that religiosity played in the struggle for justice and freedom. From the earliest abolitionist meetings to modern day commemorations, it continues to tell the story of a people who never lost hope and faith in a better future. The African Meeting House, which I mentioned is now part of the Museum of African American History in Boston, continues to serve as a cultural center, providing educational and commemorative programming. These events, all in conjunction, honor the history of Black Americans in Boston and throughout the country. For example, some educational programming that they hold is the AP African American Studies Expo, in which they showcase course books in collaboration with publishers in order to help discuss the history of Black Americans in Boston, also promoting audience participation by having student exhibitions, etc. They also host cultural celebrations like the annual Juneteenth Community Gathering, which commemorates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans on Juneteenth in the state of Texas. These gatherings often include historical reenactments, musical performances, and community discussions. Likewise, they also provide historical talks and tours. For example, in partnership with the National Park Service, the African Meeting House offers interpretive talks focused on the history of Boston's Black American community, the abolitionist movement, and the Underground Railroad. These talks provide visitors with an in-depth historical context and insight of the city. The website to the African Meeting House webpage is linked in the video description in case you want to check out some of their events or to plan a visit next time that you are in Boston. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Black History Matters 2025. Be sure to check out our upcoming videos as we continue to explore overlooked stories from Black history. The next video will be available on Friday, February 28th on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to leave any feedback on this particular video or the program, the link on your screen will take you to a survey where you can leave this feedback. This link is also available in the video description. You are also more than welcome to contact the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum at the contact info on your screen, or to leave a comment in the comment section below. Thank you.